I'm gonna wait for a few seconds for people to uh, finish coming in and setting up, and we're gonna start in a few seconds. Thank you very much for coming. We are very, very excited to be here, and thank you for your time for the panelists and Harvard for hosting this. Okay, so welcome to today's discussion. It's called Lessons from Venezuela, Electoral Resistance to Popular Autocrats, 2007 to 2013. My name is Isabela Picon. I am a PhD student in political science at George Washington University and a former fellow last year with the Nonviolent Action Lab at the Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation at the Harvard Kennedy School. And before we begin, I have a few brief announcements. The Ash Center acknowledges that the land on which Harvard University sits is the traditional territory of the Massachusetts people. We also recognize the continuing presence of the neighboring Wampanoag and Nipmuc nations. A couple of logistics too. Today's discussion is going to be recorded. We have already a lot of people live as an audience, but I mean, this is going to be in the historical record, which is very exciting. It's going to be on the Ash Center's YouTube channel. We encourage your participation. Please submit your questions at any time via the Q&A button on your screen, and we'll make sure there's ample time for audience questions. This event is part of an online series called Lessons from Global Democratic Resistance, organized in collaboration with the Cornell Center on Global Democracy, the Perry World House at the University of Pennsylvania, and the Kellogg Institute for International Studies at the University of Notre Dame, and the Democratic Futures Project at the University of Virginia, and stands for Center on Democracy, Development, and the Rule of Law, and the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. So we have big players that are interested in this conversation. We'll share details in the chat about the next event in the series, which will focus on democratic backsliding and resistance in South Korea and is scheduled for May 19th. But today we're focusing on the lessons learned from democratic backsliding and specifically resistance to democratic backsliding. And this is a huge topic. You could write, a few hundred books are already thousands of papers and books about this. But we're gonna, how do we make this conversation more specific? In two ways. First, we are discussing this from the perspective of practitioners, of people on the ground, and that is the project, the initiative of lessons from global democratic resistance focuses on the lessons learned from the people on the ground, from people that are practitioners, that have been practitioners. And second, the other angle is that we are studying a specific moment in time, which was from 2007 until 2013. Why that time? Well, first, because trying to have this conversation about the beginning of the resistance to authoritarianism in Venezuela, or about later times, the problems that we faced are not necessarily the same. And second, it's a moment in which the opposition made great strides in its coordination and in its electoral strength, while the incumbent in power was still very, very popular. And while internationally it was not acknowledged that necessarily this was an authoritarianism. Therefore, that's why we're focusing on this. The kind of repression that was faced from 2014 afterwards was more overt and was different. So that's why we're focusing this from the perspective of practitioners in this very moment in time. you can see that we're speaking in English because this moment in time for Venezuela has lessons learned for the world today. And that's why we're here. So I'm going to introduce our panelists and also say what they're going to be specifically talking about. First, Julio Borges is a Venezuelan politician, lawyer, an opposition leader, and former president of the National Assembly. He co-founded the opposition party Primero Justicia and has been in exile since 2017, continuing to advocate for constitutional order and a united democratic front in Venezuela. And he will be focusing on the coordination and unity efforts between the political parties of the Venezuelan opposition. Freddy Guevara is a Venezuelan politician and democracy advocate who served also as first vice president of the National Assembly and co-founded the political party Voluntad Popular. After years of political persecution, imprisonment, and exile, he's now a democracy fellow at the Ash Center and a researcher with the Nonviolent Action Lab. He was also part of the student movement of 2007. And that's why he will be focusing on the efforts of mobilization and civil resistance. So more the extra institutional efforts. Paola Bautista Alemán is a Venezuelan political scientist, journalist, and opposition leader. She has a PhD in political science from Rostock University in Germany. She's a national board member of Primero Justicia and director of the Institute of Political Studies, Forma, that has done political capacity building and education for political parties in the opposition. She's currently in exile and a visiting fellow at the Kellogg Institute at the University of Notre Dame, and focusing right now on research on political resilience under authoritarian pressure. And Paola will be talking more about the diagnosis of the regime and about the political situation, how we characterized the regime at the time. Roberto Picon is a Venezuelan systems engineer and electoral expert. He comes from the private sector, but then did a lot of work with the Democratic Unity Roundtable as organizing elections from the opposition's voter defense and mobilization. And he was a rector at the National Electoral Council from 2021 to 2023. And in the same way as Freddy, Roberto was also imprisoned for a few months during 2017. And Jose Gustavo Arocha is a national security expert, senior fellow at the Center for Secure Free Society, and a retired lieutenant colonel at the Venezuelan Army. So he will be focusing on the relations between the opposition and the military and security apparatus. Thank you so much.
He was also a political prisoner.
Also a political prisoner, I'm sorry. Yeah. Also a political prisoner, I would say probably the worst conditions. Not that you have to compare bad situations, but Jose Gustavo made a huge sacrifice. So this is what each of them will be focusing on, and I will get started with the first question, and so each of you is gonna have 4 minutes to answer this first question, and I'm gonna start with Julio. The first question I want to ask is, what is the main lesson learned from your perspective, from Julio's perspective, the coordination of political parties? You can say one or two, and then you can say some later, and we can keep discussing. Thank you.
Thank you, Isa. Thank you, Freddy, Paola, Jose, Roberto, and all my friends here for the Venezuela's cause. Since I have only 4 minutes, I prepare a brief scheme that I want to share with you. And I will start with this first lesson. I think that the main lesson that we learn is that fighting a dictatorship, it is at its core, in a very simple and almost primal way, a question of who divides whom, who fractures whom. This is why unity is an existential necessity in the struggle against any form of totalitarianism. And in the Venezuelan case, we have built that unity through experience that allow me to say with conviction that unity has been the rule and division has been the exception in these 25 years of struggle. Uh, I will say also that the second lesson that we learned between 2007 and 2013 is that when facing a dictatorship, participations in elections or not participating in elections is not a matter of a dogma, but rather that there are moments when one must participate and moments when one must not participate. So we started in this conference with the year 2007, but I have to say that we have a present which is very important, which was the abstention, the general abstention of opposition in 2005. That, in my retrospective view, it was a mistake, and we have to build the whole opposition from the scratches, and it was a very painful process. And we have a very important point, which has in the very moment that we are talking right now, which is when we have the recall referendum for the constitution for the eternal re-election of Chavez in 2007. But from that moment, we have to build opposition from zero. There was no electoral path. We have to build a presidential elections in 2006 with many problems because people doesn't believe or didn't believe in vote. And since we have that victory in 2007, we start building from zero opposition. And we obtained in 2008 some major important victories in the regional elections. For the first time, we got 8 different regional governments in 2008, and we get back to the National Assembly in 2010 with almost a third of the parliament at that time. So the process of rebuilding opposition unfolded during the years 2007 to 2013, which is the focus of this conference. After this abstention in 2005 and followed by the presidential elections in 2006, we started to work many years in order to have at the end the Democratic United Roundtable in 2009. That's the reason it was a long road in order to rebuild opposition. We got help from international allies. For example, the Konrad Adenauer Foundation was very helpful in rebuilding unity in 2009. And also the European Parliament also helped us in that process. During those years, the Democratic Unity Roundtable was consolidated, and in my view, perhaps it's the most solid experiment in unity that we have in all these years. And I want to be very clear. In my opinion, the rule in these 25 years has been unity in all the presidential elections, the regional elections, the local elections, and even very complex elections like the parliamentarian elections. We have been able to build a very big movement in which even the smallest political parties has a space and has a political participation. So, in my view, the fact that Maduro and Chavez did not relinquish from power is not due to the divisions or shortcuts among political parties. In my view, it has to do with geopolitical issues within Venezuela and also the military factors that Jose will address in his speech. Nevertheless, the Democratic Unity Roundtable lead with a huge primaries process, the presidential elections in 2012, and then in a very dramatic elections in 2013, just after Chavez died in 2013. So we have a lot of documentation about the rules the internal rules of the the Democratic Unity Roundtable, and I can spend many hours telling you about the laborious process of building decisions in order to have elections in thousands, literally thousand positions at local level, regional level, and national level in different elections. So, as I mentioned, uh, unity was a demand for Venezuelan society, and we were able to be open, and we were able to be at the high of the moment about this demand from civil society and the people, and that made the decision to create a different space for NGOs within the Democratic Unit Route Table. So we have the table for political parties, and then we create a space for NGOs, and we try and we started to work organized between political parties and civil society, and we did a fair, good job in making this discussion between civil society and political parties as well. So this is these critical moments that my friends choose to expose this moment is very accurate, because in the case of political parties, as I mentioned, we came from abstentions, from no kind of opposition unity in 2017, and then to building a process that has the Democratic Unity Roundtable in 2009, and taking again the electoral road and having uh, many important victories in the parliament, in the regional governments, and also at president level in 2013. Thank you, Isa.
Thank you, Julio. Thank you for that. Also, background. I think it was very important to talk about 2005 and that we got it sort of out of the way, honestly. Freddy, from your perspective of extra institutional civil resistance, relationship with civil society, what would you say are the main lessons learned for this period?
Thanks, Lisa, and thanks everyone for being here. So this period is very interesting for me because I was in both sides. First, I was a student leader in 2007 and 2008, and then I became into formal politics by being a councilman and then a congressman, but moreover into the political parties stage. So I think this gave me the opportunity to identify some lessons that I think are also suitable to many other countries that had similar situations or democratic backsliding as Venezuela. The first one is that multi-layer strategies win. What do I mean with this? Is that when you're a student leader and you are in this type of things, all the training that you get, it's about like protest, civil resistance, and things like that. If you're a politician, you're more into transitions, negotiations, incentives, and things like that, right? So this creates kind of a siloed approach of how to move forward. And then you get into these fake dilemmas between protest or negotiation, elections or resistance. And I think that's a problem that I also faced, and I was in that trap. And this creates this illusion that there's one silver bullet to defeat autocrats. And it's not like that. You have to combine all of these things, which takes me to a second lesson. These multi-layer strategies only works if you have a broad coalition. Also, you can get the feeling, and I see it also in other countries because for my actual research and my work, also working with other type of societies, there's always this thing of like political parties versus civil society, and also the institutional approach, right? So if you are facing if you are in democratic backsliding, it means that you are not just facing a political party, you're already facing the government. The government is weaponized against the opposition and civil society. And sometimes it's the state itself, not just the executive branch, that is being used against you. So the only thing that can defeat the government is something bigger, which is the society. And the society has to articulate together. So this discussion, I think it's impossible to civil society by itself, either its unions, student movements, private sector alone will not be able to defeat. And even if they do, they will not be able to assure a stable transition after. And politicians, if we think just doing politics as business as usual and not understanding that you will need also to promote deflections, to have people in the streets, to work with the students, to work in all of these play fields at the same time, you will also not find a solution. So I think understanding that rescuing freedom and democracy is a task and a duty for everyone, it's something that is very important too. And that doesn't mean unanimity. And that doesn't mean that you have to have a coalition in which everyone is in the table, because there are things that should be discussed just by political parties. There are things that should be discussed or agreed just by human rights organizations. We're not, actually, we had an experience that it wasn't that good, that we had like this space in which everyone was in the same table, and that doesn't necessarily work in the right way. But that doesn't mean that you don't have to have coordination. So I think it's a must to try to have a strategic alignment and b tactical coordination with many of the things. I will put a particular example. When I was a student leader in 2007 with the referendum that Julio was saying, Julio was one of the main leaders of the opposition parties, as he's still now, but at that moment also he was there. And we were in the student movement and we were kind of the face of the referendum and mobilizing people. But it's a lie that we could have defeated Chavez without the support of the political parties and everyone doing their job in the protecting the votes in the voting ballots, in the voting booths, sorry, and protect and having the security of the ballots and all of this like that. So we didn't have formally like a coalition with rules within, I mean, students and parties, but we had connections, we had discussions, and we moved with that. So of course, each society and each situation is different. And I think that everyone needs to find what's the right way. There's different type of coalitions, public ones that are not. But anyway, what I think these are the two main things that I would like to say. A, there's no silver bullet. You have to combine institutional resistance, elections, negotiations, civil resistance, and you cannot do it with just one by sector in their own. You need to organize and coordinate without trying to get unanimity, but you need to work with political parties, students, unions, civil society, NGOs, and also people within the regime. But that's another part of the discussion that we will have later.
Thank you, Freddy. Okay, let's go with Paola.
Thank you, Isa, and well, hello to everyone, good friends of our long-standing struggle for democracy in our country. So your question is about the main lessons we learned between 2007 and 2013 regarding the political context in our country. Before answering that question, I would like to make 3 quick points about the context at the time. First, by then, Chavismo had already made significant progress in turning Venezuela into an autocratic system, and democratic institutions were being dismantled across different branches of government. Second, even so, the government still enjoyed approval ratings, and the humanitarian crisis had not yet exploded in our country. And third, internationally, there was still no clear consensus about the regime's autocratic nature in Venezuela. There was no consensus about the autocratic nature of Hugo Chavez's government yet. With those ideas in mind, I would like to highlight 3 lessons. First, the importance of understanding the true autocratic nature and scope of the government you are confronting. The question is, how far are they willing to go to stay in power? All dictatorships and all that we are connected today at this meeting, we know that all dictatorships are harmful, but some are far more ruthless than others. understanding the scale of the authoritarian project, its internal dynamics, and its ability or inability to reform itself is essential when evaluating political scenarios and planning strategies for the opposition. The second idea is the limits of gradualism. Between 2007 and 2013, many Venezuelans believed democratic change would happen gradually, step by step. The idea was that we would slowly win elections, win local spaces of power, and eventually win the presidency and restore democracy in our country. But over time, we saw the limits of that approach. Chavismo's authoritarian nature allowed it to adapt and survive within that gradual process. And the third lesson is about what Julio talked about, and it's about the democratic unity of the democratic actors. And unity among democratic forces, of course, is essential. And we know that, and Julio did a very good explanation about our journey on that task. But by itself, it is not enough. If it would have been enough, we would have democracy in our country, and I wouldn't be in Notre Dame, and Julio not in Spain, and Freddy not in the US, and all of us in the spread it in the world. But itself is not enough. The decisive factor is whatever there are reform actors within the authoritarian regime itself. Without that condition, without reform actors in the regime, even strong and sustained democratic efforts are unlikely to produce a transition to democracy. Those are the three lessons I think I could share with you about political context, and I am open to your comments and questions. Thank you.
Paola, thank you so much. You bring amazing points that are like, I would say, the pain points. Those are the pain points of this debate. And also you were super on time, unlike Julio and Frey, so thank you. So I'm gonna give the turn to Roberto, but first, it's interesting what you say about unity is not enough. I was reading a paper by Sharon Wolczyk and Bunsan Wolczyk, the classic paper on why PVTs are parallel vote tabulations, and democratic oppositions need innovation, not only unity. They, what is coordination? What does it do? Well, it doesn't just coalesce actors. It needs to bring some innovations to allow for the opposition to win. And Roberto has some things to say to us about that in the area of the technical management of elections.
Okay. Thank you, Isa. I will start by restating the importance of unity, in this case for electoral participation and electoral organization. Because political parties and civil society each has their strengths, and not all political parties are also the same and have a nationwide reach. So you have to balance through organization which political parties are present at each polling stations or polling centers, ¿verdad? And also how civil society complements what the political parties are not able to do. For example, in our case in Venezuela, all the technical political analysis of the electoral results and the electoral system in itself were done by academics or, as in my case, people who came from the private sector. And this organization, it's very important that it be systematic in the sense that it's applied continuously and is not done some ways in some parts of the country and in different ways in different parts of the country. So you have to somehow build a system that all the political parties are willing to abide for, okay, and work and train all the political parties in this system for it to work, okay. And the other important thing is that the electoral organization needs to be data centric, based on real data that is gathered online by these systems, and then you have the indicators that tell you when, where, and in what to invest in each particular moment in the electoral cycle. Um, and very important, it's also the training that needs to be done. So all the activists or all the people that are part of the electoral effort are trained and have the tools and the logistics necessary to perform their duties. The third important thing here is also to talk the truth to the people, to the activists, and to the people in general. Because in electoral themes, it is very common that there are outsized or exaggerated denounces. And those have a way of getting back to you, because if you at a particular time denounce any particular situation, if that denounce is not fully backed by the real thing, and it's not fully understood by the people, it can generate a lack of trust between the people and the political parties and the political leaders that eventually will come back to haunt you. Because, for example, when, as Julio was mentioning, the opposition decided to boycott the 2005 regional elections, parliamentary elections, excuse me, and that came to haunt us several times in the future, making it much more difficult to generate trust in the possibility of success in the elections. And there were many very different myths that were created around the electoral systems. Some had some basis, and others were absolutely baseless. And we had to continuously talk to the people about how these things were not true, or how we were organizing to actually be able to pass through these obstacles that were real. Okay. And the other very important thing is it's more political, but not to generate um, exaggerated expectations regarding electoral results, because that can also affect your capacity to lead in the long run. And in the end, this is not related to the actual elections, but it's very important to prepare not only for the elections, but for the aftermath, okay? And that has probably to do with what Paola was saying and the decision-making process of the opposition. We were very successful several times in winning elections, but we were not as successful in capitalizing on those triumphs to execute political change. And in part, that was a condition that was systemic in the political system of the country, but also in the difficulty of taking quick decisions on to unexpected actions by the government. So I will leave it at that.
Thank you, Roberto. Okay, it's Jose Gustavo's turn to talk to us about the lessons learned on the military and security apparatus sector.
Oh, thanks, Cesar. Thanks for the opportunity. Um, well, I'm going to talk about a non-natural actor in the politics, that is the military. Sure, but sadly, in autocratic regimes, the military is the actor. So what we learned in 2007 was that being the actor, we have to coordinate, or even the student movement coordinate with us, how to handle the reform to avoid something very important for us in the military at that time, that Hugo Chavez and not presidential re-election forever. Because that is the opportunity that we know about the democracy. We thought at that time that it was possible, maybe very naive, that if we stop Chavez with the electoral reform, it's going to be a democracy later, and then we don't need to do anything else. However, the lesson was very hard. Indeed, I was in prison years later because of that, and I have the luck I'm alive, but people like me in that time is not. So the main lesson for me is, first of all, we cannot be naive when we confront to the autocracies, because until you have the power, it's not enough what you're doing. You have to be everything until you get the democracy. Okay? And the serious consequences of fail is that these systems adapt quickly and learn so fast. Indeed, what learned Hugo Chavez at that time? First, he said, no. It's not going to happen for me anymore. I'm going to create a new regions, a new geometry of power, and he create regions in Venezuela. And what does mean that regions? It means that, okay, a general is going to act as a liaison, as a network among politicians, economy, and criminal groups, sadly. So they can control and divide a military to, okay, it's a fragmented unity, we are going to change the doctrine to professional to popular prolonged war. And that means, what it means? It means social control. And we see later, we see that the military was very effective against an armed population, but very weak and with the external threat. So the main reason that Hugo Chavez did that was to stay in power. For me, it's a shock for me that I realized later, too late, that it was really from the day one what we want. Years later, we say, oh, okay. For me, that is a big lesson, Isabella.
Thank you, Jose Gustavo. Okay, I wanna now dig into deeper questions, and I think the first one, I think it's gonna go to Julio, Frey, and Paola, that are like the politicians here, because we talked a lot about the necessary but not sufficient nature of coordination and of political unity. It's not enough to be, you need coordination, but you also need technical expertise. You need coordination, but you also need strategic ability, like strategic versatility. You need to, institutional, like to be in the institutional realm, but also on the streets and with civil society. And this element that Frey says about being versatile, sometimes you can look not versatile, but incoherent, like moving from one thing to the other. So, I mean, what are the trade-offs? First, what are the trade-offs with opposition unity? because maybe some elements are very dogmatic about either one or the other. And I think we face that. And also, what are what are the trade-offs between this opposition unity and strategic agility, and in terms, I think especially perhaps regarding this thing that Roberto said regarding the day D+1, what happens after the elections. Whoever wants to go first goes
I can
first.
say two things quickly. I think one, you mentioned the first trade-off, that it's about agility, right?
Mhm.
And some democracy is not necessarily more efficient.
Yeah.
It's more effective because the collective wisdom creates better results, but sometimes you need to decide very quick, right? So I think that I think there should be some moments in which the decision needs to be taken by fewer people or even just one person. So the issue is more about the legitimacy of that small group or that or that person. So I think you can combine both. I think you can have a broad coalition, have discussions, but then you also have to agree, like the Romans did many years ago, many hundreds of thousands of years ago, when they decided that during war they will have a dictator in the way of the Romans, right? I'm not talking about the former dictator, but I think a good coalition needs to address that sometimes decision needs to be taken quickly and be clear with what are the rules for those things. And if you decide that in advance, and do you know who's going to make the decision and what's the legitimacy, I think that's something important. And the other one is security. These regimes are very good at infiltrating people and also doing espionage. But I think in Venezuela, most of the leaks were not because they were tapping our phones. They did that. But I think it was more because we had moles inside the opposition that were sending information and doing these things like that. So that's another big trade-off that you have. And yeah, and that's another thing that you have to consider, because you will move slower and probably some information might leak. The alternative to that is compartmentalizing. I don't know if you have to say that word in Spanish, but it's like, buckets of information that needs to be separated.
I think it's very interesting what you're saying, because it's about the governance of the coalition.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
sometimes that governance needs legitimacy but agility. Sometimes it needs compartmentalization. Sometimes it needs more of a collective deliberation, and it's not necessarily gonna be the same all the time. I think that's a book. That's definitely a book to write. Okay, Julio or Paula.
Well, I will make two small comments, Isa. The first one is that you have to be a real purpose and value in unity, because at the end of the day, you are building a team with your rivals, and this is very tough, you know.
Yeah.
Unity at the end of the day is a club of enemies, because you are building a unity with people that you want to win in a normal elections. So you have to build a lot of confidence, which is very difficult because it's people that is fighting with you. And also it's very, very hard, because I say that it's like building a puzzle, and a one puzzle, but with different boxes of pieces. You have to mix different puzzles and build just one picture, and that's quite difficult. But I think that the lesson that we have learned is that we can do this in a very positive way. For example, in the case of Freddie and myself, just for mention someone who is here, even though we were in different political parties, we have been a lot of confidence and a very good relationship. And we work together at the parliament, in my case as a president and Freddie as a vice president. And you have to learn how to build this kind of a major union beyond any kind of competition between political parties. And this is something very, very important and very, very valuable about what is the meaning of fighting against a totalitarian regime, which is very, very good lesson for us.
Okay. Paula.
Yes, I would only add an idea, and it's about the strength of the unity. How strong can unity be in a country? And that's related on the strength of the political parties that build the unity. You are not going to have a strong unity if you have weak political parties. So, I think that that's important, because sometimes we tend to like overvalue unity, to say that unity, whatever it comes, it's going to be good for the political struggle. And it's not that way. It depends on what kind of unity are you building, and if that unity represents what the country wants. Because otherwise, unity can be a tool for the autocratic system to divide the spectrum and to have like 101 negotiations that only help them to stay in power. So it's not, and this is very hard, because it's not about just to be united. It's to be a strong unity built by strong organizations and political parties.
Okay.
Isa, may I say something else, please?
Yes, please.
Well, something from my experience, and I'm sure that from the experience of Paola and Roberto and Jose and Freddy, that in the case of political parties is very, very hard, because civil society, in a wide, comprehensive definition of civil society, everybody is pushing for unity from the political point of view, but you don't see that kind of unity in society. So you see a private sector so divided, looking for their own interest, the media as well, making their own interest, even the church looking for their own interest, but at the same time, everybody asks for unity in the political system. So sometimes it's a kind of cruel demand, because what is real a challenge is how to build a unity beyond political parties. And this is a very tough situation. And I think we were succeed in some different periods in building that unity beyond civil society, and making this a higher unity against the dictatorship.
Yeah, and I would add that I will give you the word now, Roberto, that primaries were crucial in building that vertical relationship that is one of the reasons why political parties, the functions of political parties are horizontal and vertical, and primaries were a way of the parties to develop that vertical accountability and relationship with the civil society to help, that way they would help in the technical part of the organization of the primaries, etc. And I think it's like Venezuelans, like we developed the primary as a way not only to legitimize the leadership, but also to like agitate the civil society. Roberto, you're muted. You're muted.
I just wanted to stress something that Freddy said in his initial intervention, that it's very important. It's the need to integrate disruption tactics with cooperation tactics or within the system tactics. And in these 25 years, very seldom were we able to really do that. What happened was that during these 25 years, at some points in time, the strategy was to cooperate, to participate within the system, and in other times it was to disrupt. And basically, we had different actors within the round table that were dominating at these different times, and these caused fractures, and probably this pendulum between the disruption and the uh, participation or coordination with some regime actors or regime institutions caused a long delay in really achieving our objectives, because we were not using all the capacities that we had. So I really want to stress for other actors the need to have the whole repertoire of tactics all the time and to be able to have a decision-making process as to what is needed at some points and who executes each part. That's
Yeah.
it.
Thank you. So this is Monday Night Football. It's super easy. Monday Night Football. It's a term I learned here in the United States, and I love it because obviously, from the perspective of Monday Night Football, you need to do the coordination, the institutional coordination, make the political parties strong, then the coordination between the parties and civil society, and then say, guys, we need to plan for D-Day, and now we need to plan for D+1, so that if they do not accept the electoral results, we go to the streets and we demand and we work with the international community. That is super obvious, right? So like that, there's like a disconnect between the strategy and the narrative, right? Because if the narrative is, no, we're gonna win elections, and then the government is like, I don't care that you won the elections. Like, bueno, how do you prepare for that? So, I mean, how was the preparation for deep? And the good thing is that we're talking about ancient history, 2007 to 2013 in Venezuelan years. It's like 200 years ago, in my point of view. So I mean, was there any effort to plan for D+1? And what were the pain points, that what made it harder? I mean, for example, 2007, you could say that we were successful in 2007, but then we let the regime actually, achieve all the elements of the reform through the legislature anyway. Or you could say 2015, even we won the parliament, but or we could say 2013, the election was very contested, but afterwards we were not able to contest it. So what could we have done better then?
Tricky question. Not all the time.
I made
No,
it.
Yeah.
I brought the
No,
hard one later,
I-
like towards the end. I didn't want to intimidate you from the beginning.
No, I think that I would say that, I mean, there is a relationship between the stage of autocratization and the institutional tools for democratic resilience and the democratic outcome. In 2007, in ancient history, as you said, I mean, many, many years ago, Venezuelans, the stage of autocratization wasn't the same that we have right now. And we still have places and tools that institutions could give us, as elections, or, well, elections mainly. And we did that, and we actually win the election. And as a political actor, I would say that it's very hard when you have been educated under democratic rules to actually acknowledge that the people that you have in front, they are not going to play the same game that you are playing. And I think that that's the worst thing for a political actor to acknowledge, that you are facing evil. And when you realize that, maybe it's too late. And I think that one lesson from Venezuela to the world that are facing the same challenges that we are, is to maybe do a better diagnosis about the regime that you are facing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm going to add something, not in the opposite direction, but in the opposite side of the trouble, which can be a little bit unfair because I'm going to put some blame on our side, right? I think particularly at the beginning of the struggle, 2000s, I think we underestimated the reasons that made people choose Chavez. And I think we discriminated some of them and made this a personal discussion and attacking the leader as a person and not necessarily what he was doing. So I think there was a lot of like, oh, everyone who voted for Chavez is either ignorant or stupid or manipulated or evil communist people. I think that type of characterization, it's happening in a lot of other countries too. And the issue with democratic backsliding nowadays is that most of them doesn't come because someone made a coup d'etat, like it happened before. Most of the autocrats are elected by people, and some of them has popularity. So I think there's a question that every pro-democracy actor needs to ask themselves is like, what percentage of truth does the other side have? What am I not getting? So I think at the beginning we were a little bit too arrogant and thinking that it was just a discussion about civil rights and they are fundamental. But I think there's also underlying reasons that we needed to understand before, and that could have helped us a lot. A lot. And I think the second one, I think when you still have room for institutional fight, going with a pure insurrectional strategy might be wrong. So I wasn't part of that. I was too young. But I think, when you evaluate 2002 events and 2004, you might think that maybe there was another way to, instead of trying to create a pure insurrectional with the role of the military also participating to take down Chavez, right? I wasn't part of that. I don't have all the information, but sometimes I think you can make the same mistake that, in my opinion, we made in Venezuela, but it also happened in Turkey with Erdogan at the beginning. Then if you still have some room for institutional fight back, then going full insurrectional and try to take down the dictator by no institutional or democratic means, if you don't succeed, it might really, really come back at you then, and it will be a big problem for you in the future.
I think that Isa, what Freddie brought is a very important point for us as a lesson, because sometimes when you are fighting against a dictatorship, it's not enough if you don't have a majority of the people backing your ideas, no? And I remember when we were talking in 2005, for example, or 2006, about participating or not, the real core of the discussion was we have to build a new majority in order to be powerful enough to succeed against a dictatorship. Sometimes it's not enough to have reason. You have to build force in order to back up your reason. I think this is a very important point.
I agree, and you see the trajectory of the political parties in the first few years of Chavez. In a way, there was no unity because each of them were building their electoral strongholds in order to do what Paola said of becoming stronger political parties. You needed to build that little base first, Primero Justicia in Miranda in the center, UNT in the Zulia, etc., in order to be able, what are you going to bring to the table? Otherwise, you're just bringing hollow shells to the unity. So you could argue that the lack of unity in the first year was also strategic, but it was a problem of diagnosis, but it was because they needed to focus on their own electoral strength first. I could make the case for that.
Yeah, but remember that political parties were literally dead at the beginning of Chavez.
They were. Jose.
Yeah, but I would like to add something that I think is very important. I met Hugo Chavez when I was 16 years old. Okay, so I can say that it was a project for him to be in power forever. So he used the majority of people. Yeah, he has a charismatic guy, and he used the majority. But he knew that it's going to fail sometimes, and prepare everything to stay in power. So it's not about bad. It was about the democracy or not. It's about the project that he has or he had. So I'm not sure that working on the rules was the best for us at that time. Maybe yes, in our mindset, but the mindset of the autocratic guy or the Hugo Chavez was stay in power, and that's it. That is my reflection after these years. They said, well, always was that.
Thank you, Jose. Well, Roberto, and we're going to wrap up this part to go into the audience questions. I have a lot more questions, but I think it's good to have a conversation that you have a lot más tela que cortar. Like this is just the beginning of this discussion.
Yes. Another reason for our lack of success or preparation for when the regime, this didn't recognize elections or put obstacles in the institutions for like the National Assembly or governorships. It's also the personal characteristics of each of our party leaders and that we're in competition with each other. I mean, sometimes, for example, a candidate, for example, in the case of Ledesma won the Alcaldía Metropolitana and he was all his capacities as metropolitan mayor were stripped from him. And, people didn't really go out to defend him. I mean, there was a movement, but not everybody was organized because, he was onto himself at that point. Much probably similar as what happened to in Bolivar State when Causa R won the election in 2017. He won, but he lost, and he was not recognized, and nobody did anything. So there was some kind of, I believe, it's my opinion, pettiness among politicians. Okay, so there is one less that it's going to be bothering. Okay, it's something to think about and think. Probably because we didn't have the correct diagnostics and we were thinking that we were going to be competing with these people in the future, that we would like to have them less powerful. Okay? So it's, again, as Freddy said before, something against our own process in the Unity Roundtable.
Someone just told me over WhatsApp that she's finding this conversation healing. because like it's good to recognize that in hindsight, obviously you didn't have all the information ahead, but again, we're doing this for other people. It's for democracy worldwide and not only for democracy in Venezuela. But I'm going to go into the other questions, the questions from the audience. So someone asked, what are specific examples of like systematic data-guided organization that the opposition achieved in this period? And I would like to know that from Roberto, but also from the perspective of the politicians. Like, like things that you didn't know that you were like, oh, actually, it's actually useful to have this data, this this way of looking at things in order for my party to grow, but also for the unity to understand efforts.
You should start, Roberto. You are the...
Well, I kind of got lost there at part of the question, so I'm really
systematic
sorry.
data guiding organization. So, for example, tell us about how did you focus electoral efforts?
I can take something very short that will open the discussion for you, Roberto, because I think you were the creator of this. For us, I think it was very important what Roberto brought to the table with understanding the difference between what we call the blue centers, the blue electoral territories, the red electoral territories, and the ones that are not. And I don't mean, I know the Americans can understand that like in their own reality. I don't mean by that. It's not like electoral college. Roberto went to the very, very specific area of like where the people vote. So that could help us to understand in which areas you have to focus and in which ones doesn't, but not only through the approach of where do I need to do campaign, but also where do you need to put more effort to protect the votes.
Yeah.
So I will stop because you know what I'm
Okay.
talking about, and I think we
Yes.
should
Okay.
play that because that was amazing.
That
And again,
works.
thank you.
This worked on two levels. Okay, this worked at the polling center level, meaning that we knew that some centers were controlled by the opposition, so others were controlled by Chavismo, and in others there was a kind of a balance. So the electoral strategies for mobilization and for defending the vote was different in each of these. So you would try to get people of different types of functions in each type of electoral center. Okay, uh, that is one thing, and the other thing, it works at a different level. It's kind of the thing with swing states or swing districts in the elections in the United States, for example, where you would uh, the regime was changing the electoral map all the time with new districts. So you would need to be very agile in evaluating, okay, so now this is composed of which type of voters and what kind of chance do we have of winning, okay? And what strategy do we have? And in actually in 2010 and in 2015, we had a lot of success in winning more seats than we were supposed to against Chavismo, because we concentrated our scant resources in the centers or in the electoral districts where we could win, because there was some flexibility in the voters that we could issue different instructions to the campaign in the funding of the advertisement and the mobilization effort and the time that the candidates dedicated to each place. So that was something that we would call the esfuerzo focal, and we would say this uh, districts, we should focus on them because this is where our chance is. So it was basically based on the quantity of voters and the variability of the electoral results in the past. Okay, and we use that also for having a very efficient quick count methods to know what was happening right after the election. Over.
Paola.
Yes, I would add to that is that there were different levels of work, and the work with the activists that actually were in the polling stations, it was very important to provide them soft skills such as how to solve problems, how to face contradictions, how to handle risk, and to build small consensus when the crisis is coming. And that kind of work, you can have it with the activists that are in the field. And that's why I think that the organization has different levels, and the magic in the whole process is that to coordinate all those levels into one goal that we can all share.
Thank you. I agree.
Can I add something with the part of the protection of the votes that Paul is saying and also Roberto mentioned? And I mean, it depends on the country, right? But in Venezuela, there was also like this issue in which there was not like that kind of electoral fraud that happened in 2024 didn't happen like that before, right? It was more like a salami thing. You steal some votes here, and you prevent some popular leaders to participate. You disband or disqualify this party. So it was a mix of many things. It wasn't as blunt as what Maduro did. That was just like, no, I won. That's it, right? So in order to do this, we needed to identify in which electoral booth we were being robbed, because it wasn't in all of the countries. So for example, the analysis that many people did helped us with this data-driven approach to understand, okay, if in this area we win by 55, 51%, or we lose with 30%. But there's a particular center in which the spread is 80% or 100% in favor of the regime, then you know that most likely, statistically, that is a mistake, which means that you are being robbed there. So it helps us to be very micro-targeting and understanding where do we need to put more effort. So even sometimes we did some mobilization from strongholds to other areas to say like, you know what, in this area we're not being robbed, we have the majority. Let's move those very seasoned activists and political leaders and also the international observers to those areas because those are the areas in which we need to work. And that is also tied with Jose Gustavo approach because also the connection with the military people from those areas was important because they are also the ones who guaranteed that no paramilitary or guerrilla groups were trying to harass people. That's the condition that you need in order to also to change the results in that particular booth. So anyway, I just wanted to say that I think not only for targeting campaigns, but for protecting the votes, it was something very important to have this
And
data-driven
also
approach.
training activists not only in protecting votes, but in
civil
in civil
resistance,
resistance. I remember when I met Freddy in 2015 when we were organizing targeted teams. That was funny because I was working with Roberto and with Freddy and with other people here. They were like we were training civil resistance activists on civil resistance to protect the vote in elections. So it's like it was a perfect marriage between nonviolent action and electoral organizing, and that was data driven, but also lesson learned, like from lessons learned from 2013. So I want to ask a question that is super interesting from the audience. What role did the organized civil society, meaning outside of political parties here, play in the strategic adaptation and the lessons learned? Like, are there things that civil society say, hey, we need to adapt in this way, or we should learn about this specific instance, and that in a way that contributed for strategic adaptation? I don't know who wants to.
Well, no, just according to my experience, the role of civil society was very useful in many aspects. First of all, they were very important in pushing for unity in the political area. Secondly, they were very useful in keeping political parties within the electoral road because many of the NGOs were pro-electoral road. And thirdly, many of these NGOs make a lot of technical and professional network in electoral techniques in order to help Roberto and other people to have the ability and the connections and the groups in order to help in the elections. And civil society was a relief for building trust within the society as such. So it has been a very important aspect in building this kind of unity in this year. It has been a very positive role in our experience.
Thank you, Julio. Anyone else wants to talk about this?
Yes, I would add two more things. First, on defending human rights, the civil society has been very important, having the registration of the violation of human rights is the first one. And the second one is providing civic and electoral education to activists and to all the people in the country, like to build conscious about the importance of the vote and defending the vote.
I will add also two more: journalism in general, right? That's not necessarily civil society in terms of NGOs, but journalism and independent media, of course, has a main role. And I would say the second one that is more strategic in general, and it's related to a question that someone made in the Q&A that was like, okay, what happens when you need political parties, but at the same time you have skepticism or people who are having distrust of political parties? And that's kind of a feature of the system, because in order to have democratic backsliding, usually it's because you have a weak pro-democracy political party system, because if not, people wouldn't go for the autocrat, right? In most cases, you can have exceptions. So usually, if you're in a democratic backsliding process, especially at the beginning, your political party pro-democracy field probably will have weaknesses and will have problems of trust and connections with the society. So I think that there's the moment in which, while political parties are regaining trust, rebuilding their base, engaging with people, making policies, and changing the things that they needed to change to become competitive again, there's also a role of civil society in being the face of the movement. And sometimes it's more a strategic one. For example, I'm going to put the example in 2007 again. In 2007, Chavez was still very popular. So I think it was very strategic that the face of the referendum against Chavez were the students and that thing, because you couldn't attack them with the discourse that Chavez had before. So the polarization that Chavez used was the past versus the future. He was the future, and everyone was the La Cuarta, or the past. And he was the new thing, the revolutionary thing, the anti-status quo. When he faced the students, that kind of narrative was different. So this is just an example, just to say that sometimes when you're having a pro-democracy, pro-human rights, pro-change approach, sometimes also the civil society aspect, depending on who they are, might be more suitable to promote change, to also build bridges with the other side than people who are actually in political parties. But it has to be very strategic, of course.
Okay, there's a lot of questions from the audience about the current situation, and I need to be a little bit political because, we cannot, this is not the topic, but I think a way to bridge, I mean, there are questions about if the machines are trust, if we can trust the machines, if there are going to be elections. I mean, and I think there's no time for this, but I think there's one question that bridges between then and now. And there is, it's given the focus. So I would like to end the panel by each of you answering that. Given the focus on the lessons learned from 2007 to 2013, what opposition mistake was recognized or addressed much later in this last, that in a way, a lesson learned that we identified before, that we implemented, and that has helped the opposition be where it is now, and that we should be, that we should keep implementing.
Good question.
Well, I think that Maria Corina's organization of the 2024 D-Day was flawless, and was the corollary of all the efforts different actors had made since 2006 until 2021. I mean, all the best practices were implemented there, and things that we had tried to do in some of those elections were finally done flawlessly in the 2024 election. Okay, and should be done flawlessly in any elections we have in the future, independently of when they are. We hope that they are as soon as possible, but the elections from now on will be done in a much more technical way, thanks to the effort that was put in place in 2005 till 2013, and then now again flawless implemented with perfectionando, perfecting all the techniques that were done in the past. That's from my point of view.
I would like to add that sometimes we were like in the extremes between like making denouncing that the system was unfair, or the other extreme was saying we need to participate and we will win, like the electoral part, the la fiesta electoral versus the defeatist narrative. And we found the middle ground, which was we recognize that the system is unjust, but we give you tools to overcome that obstacle. And that was like the sweet point, that not being defeatist and not being like trying to
Ignore reality.
to ignore reality. The middle point was telling people these are the flaws in the system. This is the way it works against you, but these are tools that you can use to overcome that.
I think I will add two things. One very similar to what the both of you said. And I think Maria Corina itself is an expression of this learning. Maria Corina and also my party and I was like that too. We were very more like in the radical side and more with the approach of non-institutional or insurrectional approaches, right? But Maria Corina became the candidate. And then she couldn't run because she was disqualified. And many people thought that she was going to go back again to the insurrectional path. But actually, Maria Corina proved that we all been learning in this, and she used the election as a way to also try to dismantle the regime. So I think that in itself is also a learning that we have, and that she that she incarnated. And I think now, I hope, and I think we're doing it, we're starting to move towards that. I think that building also the necessity for a credible negotiation and with people from the regime might be something that also comes like the ways, the lessons learned. Julio participated in rounds, I participated in rounds. We've been learning how to deal with these personalities. And I think that now I believe and I hope that we are more ready to create a better strategy to actually engage with a negotiation process with people from the regime. I will hope so.
Well, I just would add that in our experience, we have been able to build a pro-democratic learning, and that's why what Freddy and Roberto have been saying, that we have been able to systematize and to know what we have learned. And the best moment of that learning was 2024 on the presidential election, where we actually won the election following four tools: unity of the position, defense of the vote, international observation, and media coverage. And that lead us to something that we're not going to solve that issue here on this event, but I think that it's very important, and it's the limits of political and democratic resilience, is that there are some moments where democratic actors can do everything, and we can do it in a very, very good and successful way. And it's not enough, and it won't lead us to democracy, because there is a deeper problem, and it's the autocratic nature of the regime that we are fighting with or of. So I think that that's something that Venezuelans, we have learned through all these almost 3 decades of political and democratic struggle, and we have to be very proud about our capacity of building and sharing pro-democratic learning to other countries or societies that are facing the same challenges.
Thank you, Paola.
I would like to add something I think is very important, that also it was informal coordination with the military. That's why they let us to have the tallies, and that is very important to show that happened that day. So that is very important. The informal coordination with the army, with the armed force, is very important to the next step, because the military is going to be there in the democracy. So we have to take them the trust, and we are able to create a new country and not confrontation. And that was the big message that we did that day.
Thank you. Am I missing? Exacto,
Yeah.
Julio. Please.
No, well, finally, just to wrap up, in my experience, we live some permanent tragedies within opposition, and I can summarize this because we fall in false dilemmas, and sometimes we took very black and white positions, and we had to be in any realm open to many options. So that was a mistake that was pushed and created by the dictatorship, and we were fool enough to fall in this kind of trap. And we have to sign or we don't have to sign. We have to vote or we don't have to vote. We have to participate or we don't have to participate. We have to talk with the military or we don't have to talk with the military. So the regime put us in any year, any month, any week in different dilemmas, and we waste a lot of time, a lot of energy, and we fight each other in this false dilemma. This was a permanent tragedy in these 25 years, and sometimes we achieve a middle ground, but we waste a lot of time and energy and even social capital because we weren't able to be open to work and in many different routes at the same time.
Okay. Well, we are almost out of time, but I'm going to give a few words to close this. I think the Venezuelan opposition, time and again, as oppositions worldwide, are able to take some rabbit out of the hat. We seem to be cornered. We seem to be
Okay.
in a dilemma that is absolutely impossible. And sometimes we cannot figure out that dilemma. But sometimes we are able to take a rabbit out of the hat and devise a beautiful solution that academia, that policymakers cannot predict. And those rabbits out of the hat are within the previous games, within the lessons learned of that pro-democratic learning. We think it is part of that. It was completely some kind of miracle, but it is not a miracle. It is part of a cognitive process of deliberation and of reflection, and that's why we are there where we are right now, where we have a real possibility of a democratic transition in Venezuela, even though it seems there's so many bumps in the road and it's not gonna be easy. So I think this is only the beginning. I thank you for your brain, for your hands, for the work you had done for Venezuela, to Carnegie Endowment for Democracy, for International Peace, to Harvard, and to all the institutions that are helping make this project possible. I hope this is only the beginning, and that I think a lot of questions were unanswered, but this is for the historical record, and we're gonna take this and prepare material that I think is gonna be useful for Venezuelans and for democratic activists worldwide. So thank you very much for your time, and have
Thank you,
a
Isa.
great
Amazing
Tuesday.
moderation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for the
Bye-bye.
invitation.
Thank
Very glad.
you. Hasta luego. Ciao.
Bye.
Gracias.
Ciao.